All right. What's up? Welcome to the video. So I want to do something a little bit different in this video. Usually a lot of my videos, I usually have like an idea or philosophy, and I kind of give my 2 cents on that idea or philosophy. In this video, what I want to do is kind of address some of the comments that I get, whether they're positive or negative, but mostly negative comments, mainly because whenever I see a comment come in, sometimes I do miss them, and I try my best not to miss comments, but I do miss them. Not that I get like a ton, because my channel's small, but I try to respond to all of them. But occasionally I do get some negative or maybe some comments that are trying to debate me, and I'm open to that. I love that, to be honest. The problem is that sometimes when I see them, I'm not necessarily in a position where I can sit there and debate, or sometimes it's a bit tedious to respond to every single text message or every single comment that comes in. So what I want to do in this kind of video is take the time to kind of read my comments, especially the negative ones, address what they're saying or what they're criticizing me of or what they're asking, and sort of give a very long and thoughtful response to those comments. And by the way, if this sounds like something that's interesting to you, or if you want to see more of this type of content, let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to do more of these. In my mind, I was thinking maybe in the future I would do TikTok comments as well, because a lot of the stuff I post, especially the finance-based stuff, it gets people, I guess, polarized, or I guess that's the best way to put it. And of course, when people are polarized, when people feel like they're being targeted, or when they have a disagreement with you, they're very quick to give you their 2 cents and to make it negative. Sometimes they try to insult you in the comments too, which I'm totally fine with. I'm happy to debate people about that as well. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to give my 2 cents on a bunch of different comments, and this felt like the simplest way to do it. So the very first comment I kind of want to respond to in long form is, it's based on a video I posted a while back called I solved America's obesity problem. It's actually pretty simple. And basically in this video, I talk about what I believe is the cause of obesity in America. Feel free to watch that if you're curious about what I'm saying. I might get to it in this video. I did see a comment at the time where someone pretty much said that the entire video was basically a nothing burger and I wasn't saying much, to which I disagree with, but we'll get to that when we get there. But the first comment I want to read is from a user. It looks like his name is ZCore Alpha 2462, and he responds, "Who are you to judge? Some people are on he put mediation in pills, it looks like. Medication in pills, I assume, is what he's trying to write. That cause weight to go up. They don't have a choice. Think." So my response to this, and basically just kind of summarize the point of the video. What I said in the video is that a lot of people in America think that our obesity problem has to do with the food that we eat. To which I said that the food is a part of the problem, because calories in versus calorie out is just a fundamental sort of formula to kind of go by if you're trying to lose weight. If you eat too many calories, you'll gain weight. If you eat too few calories, you'll lose weight. This is just kind of a general idea about weight gain and weight loss. And I said that the issue with America, while the food is a part of it, because a lot of our foods have a lot of calories and a lot of sugar and a lot of just garbage and chemicals that adds to the amount of calories in our foods, the real issue, in my personal opinion, is not the foods themselves, it's the culture of America. And when I say culture, what I'm saying is that in America, we prioritize things like work, and we have an infrastructure that prioritizes driving or convenience and comfort. Basically, our culture makes us work so much that we don't have much time to exercise. We don't have much time to relax. And I'm not saying that people don't have time. You can make time to exercise. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that by default, when you get into the work world, you're going to be in an environment where you're probably going to be in a car most of the day. You're probably going to be working at an office or working stationary or in a sedentary manner most of the time through most of the day. And so you're not moving around very much. And if you're not moving around very much, you're not burning calories. Now this person responds and pretty much, I don't know why he said, "Who are you to judge?" I'm not judging. I'm giving my 2 cents. But he said some people are on medication and pills. This is true. Some people are on medications and pills. Personally, I would say that a lot of the medications and pills that we are on is part of the problem. I think that's a huge issue as well. I think a lot of places you don't need to see people with crazy medications. You don't see a lot of people with insane stress or insane anxiety. Because in America, I think our work culture creates these conditions. In America, you're trying so hard to get work done so quickly. You're trying so hard to be super hyper productive all the time, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that you need to take these medications. I've seen people who are on antidepressants because they feel like they're just super depressed because of probably their expectations of themselves. They compare themselves to people on social media. They compare themselves to their neighbors who might be lying about their lifestyle. And they have this inflated self of where they should be, and they're upset that they're not quite reaching it, which causes them to take pills to alleviate that feeling. There's a lot of reasons why I think people are taking pills and medications. I do think a lot of those reasons are, I won't say self-inflicted, but they could probably be solved if you just worked a lot less and were a lot less stressed and were a lot less anxious, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't quite counter anything I said in my video. I do think that for these people on medications and pills, even if hypothetically there was some medication or some kind of pill that caused you to slow down your metabolism, that doesn't change the fact that if you eat less calories, you'll lose weight. And if you eat more calories, you'll gain weight. And a lot of that can be mitigated through exercise and movement. Doesn't really change anything that I said, in my personal opinion. But that's the first comment. Next one. Same person. This person has a issue with me, it seems. It looks like he responded twice to one video. So I'm going to respond to both comments simultaneously. And so these two comments are for a video that I made. I think I'm not too sure exactly when I posted it. It looks like I posted it recently, called "Money is Useless for Old People." Now, I've said this before in other videos. Whether you're watching one of my clips or whether you're watching anyone's clips, understand it's a clip. It's a short piece of content that's usually taken out of context. And in order for you to understand the context, if you're really trying to be a deep thinker, in my personal opinion, go find the original video. Go find the long format version of the video where you get the context and you get the idea behind the entire video, not just the 10-second clip that might intentionally highlight the most polarizing points. And I'm going to be honest, I intentionally try to highlight the most polarizing points because I'm on YouTube. I'm trying to get views. I'm being honest about it. This is true of everyone on YouTube. No one on YouTube, no one on social media is going to find like the softest version of their clips because it won't get views. It defeats the purpose. It's a waste of time. I'm being honest about it. But I'm not exactly sure specifically what I put in this video, but I know that this short was along the lines of me pretty much saying that if you have money, it's better spent when you're younger than when you're older, because when you're older, the money is a lot less valuable than when you're younger. When you're younger, you have a lot of life ahead of you. There's a lot of experiences that you can experience. There's a lot of things you can do with the money. When you're older, you probably start slowing down in life. You probably have a lot less things you're willing to try, a lot of risk you're not willing to take because you're older. That was the premise of this short video. And so let's read this person's comments. First comment: who are you to decide what a certain age group should do/not do? So my response to this: I'm not deciding anything. I'm giving you my 2 cents based on what I've observed, and I think based on what all of us in society can see. I think in the long format version of the video, I said something along the lines of, when you're in your 20s or 30s, a fast sports car is more appealing because it kind of gives you a certain sense of status. It looks cool when you're younger to drive a fast car. You're more likely to drive fast because when you're younger, you're a little bit more reckless. So you're probably going to take bigger risks. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying I'm speaking to what your age would consider valuable. I'm not saying whether doing this stuff is right or wrong. I'm just saying when you're younger, you're probably a lot more reckless. I think that's hard to dispute. When you're older, a Lamborghini is not nearly as valuable to you. Now, on a personal level, yes, you might have always wanted a Lamborghini. Maybe your entire life you wanted it. Maybe you were 90 years old. Maybe you're finally a multimillionaire. Sure, maybe to you personally, the Lamborghini or Ferrari or fast car or whatever might be valuable. But the point that I'm trying to make is that when you're 25, you're full of energy. When you're 90, you're probably going to be a lot less energetic. You might get the Lamborghini. You're driving at like 10 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour. I'm sure many of you, and this is a bit of a stereotype or maybe a generalization, but I think it's a valid generalization. Many of you have seen older people on the highways driving incredibly slow because maybe their faculties aren't all quite there, or maybe their just perception of speed is different than yours. Maybe they just want to go slower because they want to feel safer. Whatever the reason is irrelevant. But the fact of the matter is, we do tend to see older people drive much slower or drive a lot more cautiously. Maybe sometimes too cautiously to the point where it puts other people around them in danger on the highways. We've all seen this. And so my point was, if you're driving a Lamborghini at 90, when you're not pushing the boundaries of the car like the car is meant to be used, the car is not as valuable to you as it is to a 20-something-year-old who can push the boundaries of the car the way it's intended to be driven, who can show off to their friends who probably can't afford that exact same car because they're young, and that's the norm. Do you get what I mean? You can probably, if you're a guy, flex to girls and say, oh, I have this car that's expensive and luxurious, and every other guy around me can't have this. They can't afford it. These things are more valuable when you're younger. They're not as valuable when you're older. Same with anything you can think of. A house. If you want to buy like a big mansion, sure, when you're old, maybe you want to buy a mansion because you've always wanted it. But what's the value of a mansion when you're old? It's probably too big. Depending on how healthy you are, you probably can't traverse the entire mansion like you could when you're younger. What are you going to throw parties when you're like 90 years old? Probably not. It's probably not likely. But when you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, sure, this is a possibility. You want to start a family? Maybe you want to start a family in a big mansion with a pool, maybe, amenities nearby. You can do this when you're younger, and it makes more sense, and it's a viable strategy. When you're older, you can do it too, but it probably doesn't amount to much. You're probably not going to start a family when you're like 90 or 80 or 70. You're probably not going to have these crazy parties when you're 70, 80, or 90. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying it's unlikely. And the point of the video is that money is more valuable when you're younger, so you should prioritize making money younger than when you're older. Next comment from the same person for the exact same video. Would you rather see old people starve to death? No. At no point in the video did I mention anything about old people starving. At no point did I mention old people should have $0. That's not what I said in the video. I think, and this is going to sound insulting, and maybe it is a bit insulting. This is someone who lacks comprehension skills. This is someone who's not really trying to understand where I'm going with the content and just being upset for the sake of being upset. So it is what it is, but just want to give my 2 cents on that. I thought this was a good one. I saw this one the other day, and this is actually the comment that made me want to create this video. So I made a short that says retiring ages you faster. And the whole premise behind this clip, I'm not sure exactly what I said in the clip completely, but the whole general idea is that from research that I've done and from personal experience, from people I've talked to and people I've seen, when people retire and they don't have a goal after they retire, studies indicate that they face a higher mortality rate when this occurs. And also from people I've seen and from people I've talked to, they find themselves a lot more depressed when they retire and if they don't have an additional goal. Now, if they have an additional goal and they retire, that's different, but this is pretty much the premise of this short clip. And this person asked a very interesting question. They said, where does family fall on your scale of fulfillment? Now, me personally, I would put family like super high at the top of this hierarchy of fulfillment. I've always said this in the past. If you've watched my other videos, I've said that what people should strive for is sort of this concept called eudaimonia. And basically what eudaimonia is, it's sort of these pillars that help you reach fulfillment in life, health, wealth, and relationships. In general, I say that there's no particular order you should attempt to build these pillars. There's no like order you need to work on to build these pillars. But if you have nowhere to start, I usually suggest starting with health, because you need health to have it. First of all, it makes you feel good, makes you look good, which leads to better performance. You have more energy, which leads to better performance and better results down the line. Once you kind of get the health sorted out, then you work on your finances. You need money to survive in the modern world, especially if you live in America. Inflation's crazy, prices are crazy. I think we all understand that. Work on your money, work on your finances, work on making money, and work on learning how to save and invest money. Once you kind of get that under control, and these things are not that complicated, that aspect of money, then you move on to the relationships. And this, to me, is kind of where the family falls into this. You need to work on your relationships with the opposite sex, or depending on your sexuality, the same sex. You hopefully get the point that I'm making. But you also need to focus on your platonic relationships, friends, and your familial relationships, your family. And I think the last pillar, the relationships pillar, is the most important pillar. I made a thread about this, I think yesterday. I've seen some people chase money. I live in Loudoun County. It's the richest county in the entire country, in all of the U.S. And a lot of people around here chase money. They get, I think, a sense of status by flexing, almost, by pretending like they have the best car or the best house, or just, I know a lot. I used to do real estate. I still do it as a consultant, but I used to do it as an agent. And a lot of people in real estate, they're like, oh, I have to have a lot of houses. I'm the man because I have like tons of properties. I'm the man because I'm a real estate agent. But the reality is that no one cares. You go to the grave, no one's going to care that you did real estate. But the people who are closest to you, your family, your close friends, they'll know you based on the things you've done for them, based on how you've made them feel, based on what legacy you left behind as far as the things you've shared with them, just based on the lifestyle you've lived, and not when it comes to the money that you had or the flexing that you did to impress them, even though they don't really care. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, I thought this was a fantastic question. Where does money fall on your scale of fulfillment? Super high, like pretty much at the exact top. So that's my 2 cents. All right, so here's the next one. So this one is from, the user's name is James Brown-VT9KR. Now, let me give you the video first. And let me give you the comment, just so that way you have context. The video I put up was another reel, and it said ownership is a myth. Now, again, I try my best to choose polarizing sections of my long format content because I want people to look at the long format content, but also because I want views and I need something to hook people in to watch my videos. Ownership, especially when it comes to real estate ownership, to me is such a hot topic because a lot of people, I think the American dream, what's been sold to us in America is that you need to have a house in order to be fulfilled, in order to be happy, in order to be successful. Now, as someone who's done real estate for several years, and as someone who's been in finance for several years, and as someone who's been self-educated in finance and has also been in the field when it comes to finance, I will say firsthand, from personal experience and from education, from self-education, this is not true. This whole idea that you need to have a house to build wealth, that you need to have a house to get rich, that you need to have a house to find fulfillment. This is just not true. It's not true from a numbers perspective, from a financial perspective, and it's certainly not true for the people that have experienced it from just an anecdotal perspective. So I made a video, ownership is a myth, because it is a bit of a myth. When you think about ownership is when you kind of have something in your possession that you can control completely. When it comes to real estate, a lot of people say, oh, well, the difference between owning and renting is that when you rent, and this is the argument I've gotten a lot. People say, well, when you're a renter, you can't control the area where you live. But if you're a home owner, you can. To which I usually say, and this is 100% true, that's not the case. When you rent, there are certain things you can control and there are certain things you can't control. When you own, there are certain things you can control and there are certain things you can't control. But in the grand scheme of things, ownership doesn't truly exist because when you own something, you have complete control of it. And at no point ever when you have a mortgage or even when you pay off the mortgage, do you ever have complete control of the house. The government can always take it because you always will pay taxes forever. It's virtually impossible to not pay taxes on a property that you live at. I'm sure there are some people out there who live in the wilderness, who live on some uncharted land, who made their own house with their bare hands. I'm not talking about you people. I'm talking specifically about most of us in America that go through the normal process of going to a bank to get a mortgage to buy a house in a general subdivision or a general county in a normal city. Ownership's a myth because much like renting, if you don't pay the agreed upon amount, whether it's your lease or whether it's your mortgage or whether it's your HOA fees or whether it's your property taxes, there's an entity above you that can come and take the thing away that you're borrowing. That's why ownership's a myth. If you don't pay your property taxes, even if you have no mortgage at all, the government will kick you out of your house. If you don't put a plant up the right way. I bring up plant because I heard this recently. There's someone I heard recently who put up a plant for their in the front of their house, and the HOA didn't like the plant. I guess it violated the rules. And the HOA told them to remove the plant, and they removed the plant, and the HOA still fined them. And they were asking, what happens if I just put the plant back? And long story short, the HOA can pretty much put a lien on your property, get you kicked out, and you'll lose your property down the line. Long story short. But I bring all this up because a lot of people say, oh, well, if you have a lease, you can't do certain things. It's like, well, the same is true with a house. You just don't understand how properties work, so you don't know this. But just because you don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so anyway, to the comment, this person put, that's a single man who doesn't want a family and just intends to move around kind of logic. And that's fine if that's where you are. As a renter, you cannot pass down the house to your kids generation after generation. This logic is like buying a car and taking the bus or Uber and saying you always... This sentence is a little bit iffy. And saying you always pay for the car, buying gas, and doing maintenance work. People don't buy cars to cut costs, but for comfort and convenience. Now, there's a lot in this comment that I disagree with, and there's a lot in this comment that's false. It's just false. Let's start with the beginning part. Single man who doesn't want a family and just tends to move around kind of logic. First of all, I'm married, so you're already wrong there. And this is just a blatant assumption. Like I said earlier, I'm someone who's been involved in finance for about a decade at this point, over a decade, and I know what I'm talking about. Just because you're someone who's not familiar with how properties work, just because you're someone who's not educated on how finance works in America, doesn't mean that you understand my situation or my goals. And I'll say this is why I hate blanket advice in finance. A lot of people on YouTube, a lot of people you see, a lot of these experts even, give blanket advice when it comes to finance. I dislike it because everyone's goals are different. Now, for all this person knows, I have property. I have property maybe in other countries. I have property maybe in America. He doesn't know this. He's assuming things. Never assume. First of all, so the whole idea of me even being single is incorrect. I'm married. I've been married for about a year now, and I've been dating my spouse for about 3 years, who doesn't want a family. We literally just talked about having a family like yesterday. So also incorrect. And just intends to move around kind of logic. Now, I will say this. When it comes to the idea of moving around, what I've said in the past, and this is still true, and it's becoming more true as we develop as society in this modern era. When your parents were growing up, the idea of moving around was not that common. And I'm talking about like the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. The idea of moving around was not that common. A lot of people back then, you got a job and you stayed in that job pretty much your entire life. I think I read some study that back in like the 60s to the 80s, most people moved jobs 3 times. And by the 3rd time, you found your long-term career, which you stayed in for decades until you retired. Nowadays, that's not the case. People move around a lot. You almost have to move around nowadays to get a good job. If you're someone that lives in, say, for example, I don't know, let's make up a random state, Wisconsin. You in Wisconsin might find, maybe you want to work in tech. Maybe there are no tech jobs in Wisconsin, so you might have to move to New York, or you might have to move to California. You might have to move to Virginia or Washington, D.C. You might have to move to a metropolitan area where these jobs are located. That might not have been the case back then. That's certainly the case now. So what do? You adapt. When it comes to buying a house, the reason why I don't push people buy a house is because a house locks you into a specific geography for a set period of time. And the usual counter I get from this is, but you can always sell the house. You can sell the house, but if you're not familiar with how to sell a house, you probably don't understand. It's not fast. It's not a fast process. It takes at minimum 30 days in most places to sell a house because most people need a mortgage. Now, if you're buying with cash, it's a bit different. You can probably buy a house the next day. But in general, most people will need at least 30 days to buy a house. And that's at least. In reality, it's going to take longer because you got to market the property. You got to get an agent. You don't have to have an agent, but you probably will need one because handling contracts is a bit complicated and you probably don't know how to do it. You're probably going to have to market. Again, you probably don't know how to do it, so you're probably going to need an agent who can do it for you, and it's not going to be fast for them. It's going to take them a bit. What else? You're probably going to have to do maintenance on the house. If you've been living in the house in any amount of time, even if it's been less than a year, you probably got to do some work on it to make it market ready, to make it look beautiful enough so that way it's marketable for the people who might want to buy it. Now, if you haven't been living in the house that long, the problem with selling it too quickly is that you haven't built any equity in the house. So you're either losing money or you're breaking even. Chances are if you're selling it too quickly, you're losing money. When I was an active real estate agent, what I would tell people, and I still tell people this as a consultant, unless you're planning on living in a specific area for at least 5 years, do not buy a house because 5 years is the bare minimum it'll take to see any return on that investment. Bare minimum. Now, if you're someone who's 21 and you're thinking to yourself, well, I might get a job next year that might pay me double what I'm making now, and that job might be in California, but I live in Philadelphia. Don't buy a house then, because why are you're gonna sell your house, lose money, and then go to some other state and then start over and try to like save up for a new house? It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of effort. Rent, because if you rent, you can always just break the lease. You might have to pay a fee, but paying a fee to break a lease is simpler and cheaper than losing time and losing money sitting in one space trying to sell a house because you got to move across the country. Does that make sense? And that's maybe an extreme example, moving across the country, but hopefully you get the point that I'm making. You don't always want to be stationary. I think it was Richard Dawkins, he said, survival of the fittest for humans is being the most adaptable. Actually, for all animals, survival of the fittest is not about being the strongest. It's about being the most adaptable, about being the most malleable. You don't, as a human, want to be stuck in one location forever. You want to be adaptable. And especially nowadays, with the way the country is, with the way travel has opened up to the entire planet, you might find an opportunity in Argentina or in the UK or maybe in Japan or China or something. And you might want to go to a different country entirely, a whole different continent. If you have a house, you might lose that opportunity because you're stuck here selling it, or you have to travel. And meanwhile, the house is sitting home, or it's sitting back in the country that you moved from, just collecting dust on the market. You still have to pay the realtor eventually. You still have to kind of work with whoever it is that's trying to buy the house. Does that make sense? So the idea of just sitting in one spot, he's trying to make it sound like it's a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. He's trying to make the idea of sitting in one spot sound like a great thing. It's actually not that great of a thing. You don't want to just sit in one location your entire life nowadays, because that's not how the world works anymore. Just my 2 cents. Next thing. As a renter, you cannot pass down the house to your kids generation after generation. Now, next part. There's this weird idea, and I don't want to go too deep into this. Maybe I will I don't know, maybe I will. This, to me, sounds like the generational wealth argument, and I hate that argument. I've said this before. Generational wealth is a myth. And the reason why it's a myth is because, first of all, most people won't make enough money to pass down to their kids for it to be anything substantial. You might give them a boost. You might give them a slight benefit, but it's probably not going to be something so great that they're set for life. That's the first thing. Second thing, if you did have enough money to pass down to your kids where they'd be set for life, like if you're Bill Gates and you can give your kids like hypothetically $1 billion or a few million, and they hypothetically could be set for life, the problem with that is when you don't earn things, you don't value things. And if you don't value it, it's easy to lose it. I'm going to share a short story. I used to work at a law firm, and there was a gentleman that used to be technically a client at this law firm. I don't want to get super deep into the details, but I think his mom or his aunt or a close relative, to my understanding, was extremely wealthy in Loudoun County. Extremely wealthy, like super, 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 super wealthy. She passed away, and she left him a lot of money. He didn't earn the money. He just got the money as an inheritance. This dude was on drugs all the time. He would blow through the money rapidly. I remember the lawyers would sit there and tell me like, oh, he's back again for more money. Because I think they had it like in a trust, and he had to ask the law firm for permission to get access to the trust. And there was a certain amount of money I think he was paid by default, I think every month or so. But he would burn through it so quickly. Now, this is a dude who inherited millions, life-changing money, money that could lead to generational wealth. But the issue is that he had never earned the money, so he didn't value the money. And because he didn't value the money, he spent the money quickly. And not only did he spend the money quickly, he spent it on things that were hazardous to his health. I bring this up because a lot of people, they say they want generational wealth for their kids. If your kids didn't earn the money, they're going to blow the money. So my question to you, for the people who want this generational wealth, would you voluntarily give your kids, say $10 million if you had it, if you knew they were going to spend that $10 million snorting stuff up their nose? Like this is a serious question. If you were to give your kid $10 million and your son or daughter said, thanks, mom or dad, I'm going to take this and I'm going to blow it on certain drugs in the next year, and in a year I'll lose it all, would you still give them that money? If you're a responsible parent, hopefully your answer is no. So why are you feeding into this generational wealth stuff? You're feeding into it because you've heard other people say it, because it sounds like a great idea, but you never really thought it through. You never really thought about like what could happen. I've always said the true generational wealth is the knowledge you give to your kids. If you give your kids good information, if you give your kids good values, if you give your kids good strategies to succeed in life, that's all the wealth they'll need. If you were someone who's a multimillionaire and you gave your kid on their 18th birthday, hypothetically, all the knowledge you had in your brain, then they'd probably be a multimillionaire in like a year or so. What better gift to give to your kids than information and knowledge? But the problem is that in society, people don't value knowledge. They don't value information. So they just think about the money. And this is the problem with society in general. They think, oh, if I just get money, I'll have my problem solved. This is incorrect. Same with like lottery winners. When you see people win the lottery, I think most lottery winners, like 80% or 90%, after about a year or two of winning the lottery, they go bankrupt. And I've seen situations where those lottery winners end up worse off than they were when they started. The reason is because they didn't learn how to spend money, because they didn't earn money. They don't value it the way it's meant to be valued. Giving people things does not make their lives better. It's like the expression says, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Show a man how to fish, he'll eat forever. I think that's more or less the expression, but you get what I mean. So this gentleman, as a renter, you cannot pass down your house to your kids generation after generation. Good. I don't want to. If my kids need me to pass down their house, then they don't need a house. They need to learn how to buy their own house. Again, this is assuming that you need to have a house. You don't need to have a house to be fulfilled. You don't need it to be wealthy. If I give my kids information where they can make money, maybe they can just rent multiple properties in multiple countries and just buy houses in other countries. Who knows? They can do a lot more stuff with the money. There's more finance stuff I can get into this, why renting's a much better financial option, currently at least, than buying, but we'll save that for later on down the line. Now, the last thing, this logic is like buying a car and taking the bus or Uber and saying you are always paying for the car. The sentence is a little bit difficult to kind of understand. What I assume, and this is me assuming because the sentence is a little bit broken, what I'm gathering that he's trying to say is that if you have a car, it doesn't make sense to take the bus or to take public transportation, to which I would say that's not true either. Good example. Recently, me and my wife, we took a trip to DC. We both caught Ubers the entire weekend. I have a car. My car is perfectly fine. I drive a Chevy Camaro. I could drive my car. I don't want to drive my car because, one, driving the car is expensive because of all the parking, all the gas in DC, all the terrible streets. I just don't want to be bothered with the stress or the finances of it. Two, it's much more convenient to call a Lyft or call an Uber or to use public transportation in some situations than to use your car. And if you had a car, sometimes it's cheaper to do public transportation. Maybe you have a car, but you found out that insurance in your area was expensive. Okay, well, Uber might be cheaper than maybe if your Uber, per week or per month or whatever is like a couple $100 and your insurance would be like double that or about the same. Maybe it's cheaper because maybe with the Uber, you don't have to worry about car maintenance. Maybe you don't have to worry about gas. Maybe you don't have to worry about the hassle of getting in your car and having to drive to work or drive wherever you need to go and have your brain pretty much occupied by just focusing on the road. Maybe if you're taking an Uber, you can do work. I've actually seen people who are wealthy catch Ubers wherever they go. And their thought process is, it's a little bit more expensive to catch the Uber, but because I can do work while in the Ubers, especially if I have long trips, long commutes, I'm effectively making more money this way because I can't do work while I'm driving, but I can do work when someone's driving me. Perfect example, not to go on too deep of a rant, there's a real estate agent. He owns a company called Sirhan. His name is Ryan Sirhan. If you get a chance, look him up. When he was doing real estate, he had a driver, and his thought process was, I could drive myself, but I can't do work when I'm driving. I could have a driver, and I can close deals while he's driving me, and I'm still getting the exact same effect. I'm still getting from point A to point B, but I'm using my time more effectively by having him drive me than me driving me. So again, another reason why this logic is flawed. And this is the same logic people apply to buying houses. They think that if I buy a house, I'll be financially secure. They don't run the numbers. They don't understand the math behind it, and so they don't end up succeeding. So I'm probably going to go through one or two more because I know I went on a crazy rant that I was not expecting. Okay, so I think we have another one based on my ownership video. And this person's name is Taylor Bowl Shoy 9906. They responded, no, this is not apples to apples. Break it down like an accountant. Instead of looking at it as renting and owning, adjust your perspective to assets and expenses. And the distinguishing factor between the two is leverage. I can leverage my home that I still have a mortgage on because I have stake in the house. But I can't leverage my apartment or rental property because I'm a tenant and I have zero stake in it. I can also make the rules in my house that I've purchased. All right, so I'm gonna read the full comment, but I'm gonna stop right here because he's already saying things that are incorrect. First of all, break it down like an accountant. I will say this. You can take deductions off of your rental, off of the property that you're leasing. A lot of people think that there are no tax deductions that you can take, that you can only take tax deductions off of owning a property. This is not true. You can take tax deductions off of a property that you're leasing. I'm not a tax advisor. I'm not a CPA. This is just things I'm sharing with you from my personal experience. If, for example, this is just one example, there are many examples of this. And this is, again, why I say people need to understand financial education, because most people do not. And so they hear real estate agents and they hear people who they think know what they're talking about say stuff when it's 100% incorrect. You can do something, for example, if I had an office in my apartment, I can make the square footage of that apartment. I can take that I can write that off my taxes if I have a business or a sole proprietorship or something along those lines. You can do the exact same thing in a house. So what's the difference? The difference is I'm spending less money on my apartment, which means that's less money coming out of my apartment every single month. But since I'm still taking off a percentage of like the property that I'm living at, not owning, but living at, I'm still reducing my overall tax burden at the end of the year. Still a benefit for me, less money up front. Where's the harm in that? I don't understand. Next thing. And that's just one thing. There are other things you can do with properties as well. There are other things like the Augusta rule, for example. If you don't know what that is, look it up. But there's other things you can do with a property you're leasing that people think is exclusive to a property you're owning or a property that you have a mortgage on. This is not the case. Let's see. He also talks about leverage. Now, leverage to me is one of those terms in finance that people bring up a lot, and I think people don't quite understand what leverage is. When I think about leverage, I think about basically opportunity. To me, leverage is almost synonymous with opportunity. When you live in a house, you don't really have that much leverage. What leverage do you possibly have? Especially initially, like I mentioned earlier. Some people say, well, I have equity. No, you don't. You do not. A lot of people think that the moment they buy a house, they have equity. There are some circumstances where you can buy a house and you can get instant equity that's actually substantial and actually worth your time and effort. This is not always the case. There are scenarios in which you can do little tweaks to your house to jack up the value of your house. It's called forced appreciation. You can do this in some instances, but not all instances. And it's not always something that many people can take advantage of, especially because it requires insights. You have to know how to do these things. And not every real estate agent is going to share this with you because, surprise, surprise, like every industry, real estate agents are focused on making money through commissions. They're not focused on you getting the extremist, highest value out of your house after the sale has been made. Does that make sense? Maybe before they'll share this with you if they even know this. A lot of agents don't know this. But that's not their concern. Their concern is to make sure you either are buying a house so they can get commission or you're selling your house so they can get commission. This is the truth of the entire real estate industry. When it comes to this idea of leverage, though, some people will say to me, well, I can always do a cash out refinance. You can't when you first buy the house because you have no equity in the house. What are you refinancing? What's the purpose? And that all depends on the interest rates too and other factors. So that's not a viable option for many people. Oh, but I can also do a HELOC, which stands for a home equity line of credit if you're not familiar with that term. Basically, use your house as like a credit card. That's the simplest way I'll put it. You could do that if you had equity. But again, I mentioned this earlier. It takes a while to get any real equity because you're getting a loan from the bank in the form of a mortgage. That's what a mortgage is. It's a loan from the bank. And the bank wants to get paid first. They're not paying you first. The bank's not doing charity work. They don't care about you making your house a financial tool or financial vehicle or path towards wealth or success. They do not care. The bank's job is to make money. That is their only job. That is it. If they're not making money, they're not concerned with it. This is why a lot of banks, by the way, don't like to hold real estate because they can't use real estate the way people can or companies can. They're not in the business of holding real estate. And I'm talking about when people go bankrupt. They sell them at a lower price or they do short sales. That's a whole different video topic. But HELOC is risky, so I wouldn't recommend that either. So what other leverage do you have in your house? Tax benefits? I've already explained that you can still get tax benefits, many of the exact same tax benefits from renting. So what are these other forms of leverage this guy might be referring to? I don't know, to be honest. I really don't know. There's a certain social aspect to it, sure. You can own a property and maybe you can invite people over, but I can also invite people over to a nice apartment. And I've had some people say, well, what if you want to start a family? How are you going to start a family renting? The same way you would start a family by buying. Renting has nothing to do with the size of a property. I feel like sometimes people say this to me, and I think they have in their mind that renting means that you're limited to the size of a property. I live in Loudoun County. I've mentioned this already. There are houses in Loudoun County that you can rent for $4,000 a month that are single family houses with a big backyard and lots of square footage. It exists. You can rent these places because someone else owns it and they don't want to live there. Maybe it's someone who's super rich and maybe they have multiple properties and this is just one property they have that they don't want to live at. The reasons are irrelevant, but renting is just living somewhere. It's living somewhere temporarily at a mutual agreement. That's basically all it comes down to. So there's not that many arguments when it comes to this idea of opportunity or leverage. There's not much you can do with a house that you can't do with renting. And I'd argue, to be honest, you have a lot more opportunity with renting. I mentioned this earlier. If your mortgage is $5,000, then the rent in that area is probably going to be $4,000 or $3,000 because there's other stuff that goes into owning a property that does not go into renting the property. Does that make sense? Because you're renting it from someone else. So the other person might be paying some of these expenses, and it, depending on how it's all structured, it gets offset. It's a whole different story. The point that I'm making is that if you're renting it, you're probably not spending as much money. You're already not spending as much money because you don't have to put down a down payment, which is a massive amount of money that you have to save up front in order to even get the opportunity to get the mortgage. Does that make sense? So, I don't understand what this person's saying. There's more opportunity in renting currently. I'm not saying this is true always, and I'm not saying this will always be true. But currently, there's more opportunity in renting than there is in owning. So I'm not sure what he means by that. But let's continue with the rest of the comment. But I can't leverage my apartment or rental property because I'm a tenant and I have zero stake in it. Sure, you might have zero stake in it, but who cares? It doesn't matter. You don't need to have a stake in every single thing you touch. You don't need to have a stake in the hospital you go to. You don't need to have a stake in the doctor's office you go to. You don't need to have a stake in the local library. You don't need to have a stake at the local restaurant you go to. Not everything needs to be about owning something. You don't have to have a stake in everything. Sometimes the only stake you need in something is the agreement that you make with the person you're dealing with. If you're going to a restaurant, the only stake you need in the restaurant is that they give you good food, because that's the agreement you're making with the restaurant owner. The only stake you need at the local library is that there's books that you can read and that you can take out for free with a minimal charge if you don't bring the book back in time. That's the only thing you need a stake in, is that agreement between you and the other party. The idea that you always have to be owning stuff is stupid. I'm going to be quite honest. It's a bit dumb. But let's continue. I can also make the rules of my house that I've purchased. No, you can't. This is not true. And this is something I've argued with people a lot on. A lot of people say, well, if I have my own house, I make my own rules. Says who? If you own a condo, there are certain rules that the condo forces you to abide by. If you live in a single family house and you live in an HOA, there are certain rules that the HOA forces you to abide by. You might live in an HOA. This happened actually a few years ago. I had a friend who owned a house, a single family house, and he wanted to use it as an Airbnb. And we were looking through his HOA's rules and restrictions. And one of the rules said, you cannot use your house as an Airbnb. And our thought process was, the reason why is that Airbnbs attract just strangers into the neighborhood. And sometimes strangers leave messes. Sometimes strangers have big parties and they don't really care about the neighbors or about the noise because they don't live there. They're living there temporarily. But he couldn't use Airbnb. And this was the reason why he bought the property, to Airbnb it. And they changed the rules so he couldn't do it. So the whole point of the property was purposeless at this point. He just had a property he was paying a mortgage for that he couldn't rent out. And it was also too expensive to break even on rental costs. Because like I mentioned, a lot of people think, I had this debate with somebody on TikTok actually. And he said, the rent is a reflection of the price of the property, of the mortgage. So you need to be renting the property based on what the mortgage is. And this is ideal, but this is not always true, because rents are competitive. So if your neighbor down the street bought their property, say for example, 10 years earlier, and they can afford to rent their property at $1,500 a month, and say a lot of people in that area are renting their property at $1,500 a month, you might have just bought your house and your mortgage might be $3,000. You can't afford to rent it at $1,500. You have to rent it at like at least $3,000 to break even, but really like $3,500. But then the question becomes, why would I rent that house then? I'm not going to rent the $3,500 house when there are other houses on the exact same block or in the exact same vicinity that's half the price. Like, hopefully you watching this, that makes sense to you. And so this is why I say like renting is cheaper than owning, because the person owning takes all the risk, but they also have a lot more burden to be mindful of. You renting, you don't have to worry about that much. And it's probably going to be a lot cheaper. Statistically, currently, in most major cities, renting is cheaper than owning. Fact. So, I don't know. A lot of these things that people say about renting versus owning just aren't true. People just didn't look at the statistics. They don't understand the numbers. They don't understand anything about real estate or properties. And as far as control, you don't have that much control. If you live in an HOA and you buy a house, you can't paint it any color. I remember this years ago, actually. I was helping someone buy a house. And they were selling it to somebody, but the person wanted like a fence. They wanted like a fence to be built in a certain area of like the house. And we had to get permission from the HOA to see if we were allowed to get the buyer to sweeten the deal by buying this fence, or like by buying the fence and like building a fence before the property was sold. And long story short, the HOA said no. There's more to it than that, but that's a long story. That's the short version of that story. The HOA said, no, you can't buy a fence because we don't allow it. So where's this idea of doing whatever you want with a house you can own? You can't. Like, HOA might tell you no. Now, if you live in some areas where there are no HOAs, sure, you might be able to get away with a lot more. But the same might be true with the renting situation. Maybe you rent in some areas where the rules are a lot more relaxed. Okay. There's always going to be some limitations, but the idea that having a house means there are no limitations is fundamentally incorrect. There are always going to be some limitations on what you can and what you can't do when you own a house. So he's still incorrect in that situation as well. Let's continue. Whether I have an opportunity that requires more capital or if I fall in hard times, I can pull money out that I've been paying into my mortgage. I mentioned this. That's not correct. Maybe down the line after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you can do that. But then my argument is if you're renting, you have more capital up front anyway that you could be investing into something else with a much higher return that allows you to do the exact same thing. If I could buy a house and the mortgage is $3,000, or I could rent and my rent is $1,500, then instead of me paying $3,000 plus, because there's more expenses, but let's just say $3,000 for 10 to 30 years, I can take the extra $1,500 today and put that into a account that today will make me more money because, like I mentioned, real estate takes a while to appreciate in value and to get a return from. You need to be there for at least 5 to 10 years to really start to get equity. Meanwhile, if I put my money into like an S&P or some other account, or even if I were to do like a REIT, a real estate investment trust, that might have a higher return today than the house will. And if I need the money, I can just pull money from that account when I need it. Maybe there's a penalty, but there's a penalty with the house too. If I use a home equity line of credit, like we've established, that's risky. And it's just a credit on your mortgage. It's not like money you don't have to pay back. You're just taking money that you already put into your house back out. So you can do these exact same things without owning a house and probably for a lot cheaper. But let's continue. But you're shit out of luck if you rent an apartment. You're either begging to God that the bank will approve a personal loan that will ultimately have an interest rate because you don't have any collateral to offer, or you're lucky to have a charitable mom and pops. Instead of dissecting the understandings of renting and owning properties, look closely at the utilities and how they can influence the actions of others around you. I'm not sure what the last part means. The first part is nonsensical, to be quite honest. When you're buying a house, you need to show that you have a certain amount of money. You need to show the bank that you can afford to buy the house. So I don't really know what he means when he says the bank will approve you for a personal loan. If you have the money to buy a house, you probably have the money for a personal loan. And if down the line you needed money for a personal loan, assuming you were smart, you would just have the money. You wouldn't need the personal loan because you were saving the money and investing it wisely when you're renting, because renting, you don't pay as much money, typically. See, like, his argument simply assumes that you're wasting your money by renting, when in fact, there are plenty of people like myself who rent and just invest their money elsewhere. They invest into businesses. They invest into other forms of real estate, like real estate investment trust. They invest it into stocks. Maybe you want to be that kind of guy that invests into bonds, even though I don't really recommend that. But maybe you have a strategy that, works with it. I'm not familiar with that kind of strategy. But you get the point that I'm making. You can put your money in other things. You don't have to put it in just your primary house. And to be honest, your primary house is not an asset. It's a liability because you're still paying money for the utilities, you're paying money for the taxes, you're paying money for the repairs, the maintenance, the replacements, everything. It's not a good investment. It's only an investment when you have a cash flowing property, but we'll save that for a different video. Yeah, so I'm gonna end the video here because I think that I put a lot of information into just those few comments. Let me know what you guys think about this video. Let me know what you think about this type of content. I have a lot more comments to get through. So if you want me to do more of these, I'm happy to do them. I love this kind of content because it lets me go long, and I like this type of content because it lets me go deep into some of the concepts I share in my videos, but maybe I forget things, or maybe I just don't explain things as explicitly as I could because of the nature of YouTube. But yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you liked the video. Let me know if you disliked something. If you have any hate comments, leave them below because I can make a video responding to your comments. And yeah, I'll see you next video. Peace out.